Hello GNDR members, my name is John Cammack. I'm a trainer and professional accountant and manager, and I have over 30 years experience working with civil society organisations around the world. I will be taking you through a series of videos to help you strengthen your financial management capacity as part of GNDR's Local Leadership Academy. I hope you will enjoy these videos and find that you can use the learning in your own organisation. So we're going to look in this video at how we plan effective budgets and what are the ground rules, what are the things that you just need to know about budgeting that you may have picked up along the way, or maybe you haven't. And we'll look through some of these of the important areas that you need to know about. First, here is a definition of budgeting. And budgeting is about planning. It's not only about finance, but it's about saying what are our objectives, what are we trying to achieve? And generally then we put those objectives together and then start to put some costs around them so we know what the budget will be. How much is it that we're actually trying to fund and what are we trying to do? Usually the budgets too will be for a particular period of time. So in organizations, it's mostly a year that we work towards. With projects, it can be several years that we're getting funding for, and maybe that's broken down into annual sections, but it's also for a smaller timescale of a project, maybe for 6 months. It can be different times, and it can be over different parts of the year. So we may be involved in funding arrangements that don't fit nice and neatly into our organization's financial year. The various processes of budgeting are, to start with, are the planning stage. So putting the budget together is what we do first of all. And we'll have a look in a moment or two at a bit more detail about how that's put together. But the planning of the budget is an important part if we're looking in our own organisation, or indeed if we're working with donors and trying to put a budget together for them to say whether they will fund us or not. So planning a budget is really important, and important to get it as accurate as we can so that when we ask for funding or we're working in our own organisation, we know what we're going for, we know what we're trying to achieve with that. After we've agreed the plan and it's been approved by a donor perhaps, and certainly by our organisation's own decision-making body, we start to implement the activities. So we start to achieve what we're trying to achieve in the budget. And then after a period, we then need to look at the planning and say, well, how is that going against what we've done so far? In bigger organizations, this might be done on a monthly basis. And in smaller organizations, it might be done on a quarterly, a 3-monthly basis. And that gives us an idea then, are we more or less in line with what we thought we were going to do? Or is it too slow, too quick? Are we spending too much money too quickly? Or are we not spending enough money? And how does it work on the different parts of the budget? Are we spending too much on one or too little on another? This is really important to make sure we're achieving what our objectives were, but it's also important to make sure we're properly funded. And it's a point at which we might go to a donor and say, actually, we're a bit overspent on this and a bit underspent on that. And then maybe the donor will be agreeable to change some of the funding from one part of the budget to another. But it's the monitoring stage that gives us, it's a trigger for making sure that we start to look at this and then take actions with donors as we need to. So reviewing the costs, looking against the budget, and talk with donors are the next stage of what we do. And then the third of these stages is evaluation. Now, in some organizations, we don't do a formal evaluation for the budget, but if it's a project, we often do. We'll often look for the project period and say, well, it's been for 2 years. Let's have a look at how we've done over those 2 years. And the evaluation then becomes part of the process for the next period, the next project, or the next year in the cycle for the organisation, and it informs what the next planning situation will be, because we've learned from the experience of the current project or the current year's activities. So those three go together, planning and monitoring being the key ones, and evaluation is sometimes used. But even when evaluation isn't used, it's often seen as a way of making sure that we think through a bit, what can we learn from the previous year or the previous part of the project, and how can we take that into the next period. So the process of budgeting is involving people in the process. And this is really good practice with budgeting, that we've got people involved who know about the project, they know what things are likely to cost, and they know what funding is arranged. So involving people is important. And there's a lot of research that's been done to say that the more you involve people in the process, the better the impact of what you do. So it's practically very important, but also it's got a part of it that involving people tends to make sure that you're on the right lines and you have more effectiveness in what you're trying to achieve. Second process is to respect your own and any donor regulations. So you've got to work within the framework of what you know your organization's allowed you to do. It might be an amount of money, or it might be particular objectives. But also, if donors are saying, we're prepared to fund this, but we're not prepared to fund that, you need to be sure that what you've got is actually going to work with them. And that's an important part too. So respecting those regulations that are there. A good test with budgeting is to look at the cost of what you're trying to do alongside the benefit. So if you know how much the cost is going to be, then you can ask yourself the question, is what we're getting for that cost okay? Is it about what we'd expect? Or is always, when we look at it, are we saying, well, that's incredibly costly for what outcomes we're going to get? Or you might say, on the other hand, actually, it's a relatively low amount of money and we're getting lots and lots of benefits. But in looking at the budget, it's a good question to ask to make sure that you're on the right track. And certainly if you're getting donor funding, donors will be asking that question too. So if you've asked it before you go to the donor, that's probably going to mean that you're more likely to get funding for that. And the final of these is to include inputs with unit costs and quantities. And this is how we present the budget. So it builds up from what individual inputs we need, what it costs per unit, and what the quantities of what we're doing are going to be. So this, for example, could be if you've got a staff member, you might say we've got 3 staff members and their salaries are this, the unit cost of their salary is this, and we're going to pay them every month for 12 months, might be an example of that. Or it might be if you're doing a training course, you might say, well, okay, we've got the training course, we've got 5 days of this course, we've got the unit costs, we know how much it's costing for the facilitator, we know how much it's costing for the venue and for the training materials, and we know how many participants there's going to be. So if we've got that built up, we can then say, well, if the costs go up, if the venue price went up, for example, we know that's the reason why we're overspent in the budget. That breakdown is really helpful when we come to monitoring the budget. In the next video, we'll look how we put a budget together using those different things of inputs, unit costs, and quantities.